Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Darius Danish, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Institute of Project Management. It's a pleasure to have you joining us for today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today across Australia and pay my respects to elders past and present. Infrastructure plays a critical role in shaping Australia's future, from supporting national productivity to enhancing the livability of our cities and regions. The infrastructure decisions made today will influence our economic prosperity and community well-being for years to come. For project professionals, understanding these national priorities is particularly important. Behind every major infrastructure initiative are teams of project leaders responsible for turning policy ambition into successful delivery. That is why today's session is so valuable. The infrastructure priority list developed by Infrastructure Australia provides independent, evidence-based advice to government on the most important infrastructure investments required over the coming years. We are very pleased to be joined today by David Tucker, Chief of Project Advisory and Evaluation of Infrastructure Australia. David leads the evaluation of nationally significant infrastructure proposals and brings extensive expertise in infrastructure planning, investment, and project program and portfolio assessment. David will provide an overview of the latest infrastructure priority list, including the key priority areas identified to address Australia's infrastructure needs and the proposals that have the potential to deliver the greatest benefits for the nation. David, thank you for joining us today. I will now hand over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Darius. Thanks so much for providing the opportunity for us to speak to you today. As Darius said, I'm Chief of Project Advisory and Evaluation, and joining me today is Coralie Williams, who's a director in my team, and Coralie was instrumental in the delivery of the 2026 infrastructure priority list. So we're going to share the presenting responsibilities. We'll probably speak for about half an hour, and then we'll open up for questions. So before we get into the specifics of the priority list, I thought it would be worthwhile just providing a little bit of explanation around who Infrastructure Australia is and what we do. It's important context to understand how the priority list was developed and how the decisions were made for inclusion. So we are the Australian government's infrastructure advisor. We have quite a unique role in that way, in that we're the only government agency that is providing advice on infrastructure needs and opportunities from the top down. So we look across sectors, in particular transport, energy, water, telecommunications, and some social infrastructure as well. And over the last year, we've traveled, not just the past year, we constantly are traveling across the country, meeting with states, territories, and industry to understand their priorities, constraints, and opportunities firsthand. We're not a very large organization. We're only around 40 people, and we are governed by 3 commissioners. So our commissioners come from a background of private and public sector experience, and they provide a high strategic view on IA's role, and obviously they approve our work, and they really provide a foot in the door to many of our state and territory counterparts. And so what we try to do is provide a top-down perspective connected to local insights so that we can inform decisions that are made by the Commonwealth. So we don't have funding responsibilities. We purely provide advice to the Commonwealth on where we feel they should invest, obviously limited taxpayer funds. So just going over our remit in a bit more detail, on the slide there is a number of our key products. We identify gaps and opportunities, and so we utilize products like our infrastructure audit and our infrastructure plan to do that. We use the evidence that's built out of that research work to define priorities through products like the infrastructure priority list. And we also provide advice direct into government to inform their budget decisions. So states and territories will make submissions to the Commonwealth seeking money for various infrastructure initiatives. And we provide an independent, evidence-based view to inform their decision making. We also have a statutory role to evaluate business cases where proposals are seeking more than $250 million of Commonwealth government investment. And we monitor market performance through tools like our market capacity report, which has been developing over the last 5 years. So across this scope of work, we have a principle around collaboration. As I mentioned, we're a small organization. We provide independent advice, but we don't work independently. We are reliant on good relationships and information sharing with states, territories, and the Australian government to ensure that we can provide an evidence-based and again, an independent view that is not driven by political interests. Our strategic focus areas are what IA has identified as those focus points where we believe our independent and evidence-based review can make a big difference. And they're probably not unsurprising. Obviously, the energy transition is something we're all well aware of, and it's going to have enormous impacts on the way that we think about, plan, and deliver infrastructure. And for IA in particular, we're looking at planning and delivery of enabling infrastructure. And indeed, there's a number of proposals on the priority list that relate to that. In terms of housing growth, we don't have a role specifically in housing, but we do recognize how enabling infrastructure, particularly in terms of transport, can enable growth and speed of growth to improve, obviously, housing supply, but also the livability for our communities. And then finally, in terms of modern, safe, and resilient networks. So this is where we look at how infrastructure systems are nationally integrated to ensure that they are resilient to a whole range of factors. And obviously, in the current environment, we're seeing a lot of pressure from global trends that are affecting the resilience of our infrastructure today. So lifting that up a little bit, as I mentioned, we look at infrastructure from a top-down perspective. And in developing this infrastructure priority list, we looked at where is the country going over the coming decades and what are going to be the key influences for driving decisions in ensuring that infrastructure is developed at the right time in the right places. And so it's a very complex environment. We're seeing population growth of expecting to reach 40 million people in the country by 2065. Obviously, I mentioned the clean energy transition, really shaping how we invest, plan, and build. Geopolitical pressures, which are evident for us all to see at the moment, really straining our supply chains. Rapid technology change is also transforming our cities and workplaces. And through our market capacity work, we've identified that the infrastructure pipeline now stands at $242 billion over the next 5 years, which is a growth of around $26 billion on the previous year. So there is no shortage of ambition to build, and certainly we're not slowing down. But where we use our influence is to identify what is needed most. We can't build everything everywhere. And therefore, how can we best use our finite resources to get the best bang for our buck? And so this underscores the importance of the infrastructure priority list as a cross-jurisdictional, cross-sectoral view of the highest priority, nationally significant infrastructure proposals across the country. So I've used this word top-down a few times now, and that's really important because we're not just identifying a wish list of proposals that have come forward from states and territories, but really trying to look at what are those major influences on the country and how is our infrastructure going to best respond to that over the coming decades. And so since we published the priority list a month ago now, it's been really encouraging to see how much it's been debated and scrutinized across sectors and across jurisdictions. And it's really been a point of great conversation, and sessions like this today help us to really think about how it can evolve going forward. As it says on the screen there, it's a blueprint. So it is by no means an exhaustive list of everything that the country needs to do over the coming decades. There is absolutely no shortage of that. We've developed a priority list with 68 proposals. There are dozens of other things that can or could be done over the coming decades as well. But what we've tried to really hone in on are those proposals where we feel the Australian government's investment is going to be best spent. And so we've looked at, as I prefaced, around housing, around energy, but also around some of the outcomes we want to achieve around productivity, resilience, and livability to make sure that the decisions the Australian government make are really in the national interest. And then we've also looked at the sequencing of proposals and how they appear in that across that blueprint, so that we're not just pushing everything into today's budget decisions, but also providing a foresight on where the Australian government should be contemplating their investments in the short, medium, and long term. And so we've taken that top-down approach. We've also taken on board submissions from state and territory, so a bottom-up, and we've married those together to really consider what are the highest priority proposals where there is cohesion and alignment to national strategic objectives. The priority list that we'd had up until this year had just grown and bigger and bigger. There was over 160 proposals on that list, and that just became a list of infrastructure needs. So what we've created now is a list of investment opportunities, and so it's much more targeted and actionable for the Australian government to utilise when it's making its investment decisions. So I've touched on this a little bit, but in developing the list, it's by no means done in-house through just a simple desktop exercise. We have been engaging with states and territories across the country over the last 2 years. We've got on the ground, we've spoken to ministers with transport and departmental secretaries, even premiers in some cases. And so we've really tried to understand what the strategic plans are of the different states and territories, and then specific proposals that are seen as priorities for them. And then, as I said, we've married that up to our top-down view to ensure that the proposals we've identified are aligned to those key priorities and objectives. A number of the pictures there are near ports. You see a couple of boats in the background. That has been a real key feature for us. We've been to ports in pretty much every state and territory. That's container ports, that's defense-related ports, that's also some heavy haul ports. And so that's been a key feature of proposals that we've identified, because we see ports as so key to our freight supply chains. And so just to re-emphasize, the priority list is a genuine national view, drawing on insights from lots of stakeholders to support the decisions we ultimately made. And so then I just want to talk about how proposals have actually then been positioned and framed on the priority list. So in 2025, we published an annual budget statement, and that was our advice into the Commonwealth budget process at that point in time. And when we did that, we identified the 5 infrastructure investment priority areas that you see on the screen. And so they were identified by Infrastructure Australia as the key areas where we think there is greatest opportunity to support national outcomes. Now, obviously, this doesn't cover every sector, and you'll see that there is quite a heavy focus towards transport. But that is quite deliberate, because transport is where the Australian government typically plays most in terms of investment decision making. There is obviously a huge pipeline of proposals in the energy sector and telecommunications as well. But many of those, and indeed water, but many of those are funded by either the states themselves or by the private sector. And therefore, as I say, our role is about identifying where the Australian government in particular should be directing its funds. And so high productivity freight networks, as it says, really thinking about, in particular, cross-jurisdictional networks and systems, and how do they best support the growth and diversity of our economies and communities. Ports capacity and connectivity, as I said, it's the starting point for many of our supply chains, and therefore how can we get the most out of our ports and our freight movements. And so associated with that is things like intermodal terminals, so that we can really strengthen our supply chains and improve the amount of freight that's carried on rail. High capacity transport goes without saying. And what that achieves in terms of the sustainability and livability of our cities. We've taken a deliberate focus on public transport so that we can enable things like housing growth and boosting livability over the long term. Secure, sustainable water. That's looking at climate resilient water supply, so non-rainfall, essentially, and the opportunities there may be in terms of recycled water or desalination, so that water security is available for all. And then delivering on net zero and clean energy. So that's recognizing the huge pipeline in renewable generation. And then for us on the priority list is, what is the enabling infrastructure we need to prioritize to enable that to occur in a timely manner? And so whether it's in upgrading critical freight corridors to strengthen our trade competitiveness or expanding ports, the proposals on the priority list are really around ensuring that there's cohesion and that there's coordination, so that the Australian government can invest in those proposals, recognizing the greater outcomes that they will achieve. So on that point, I'm going to hand to Coralie, and she can talk in a bit more detail on the proposals against each of these 5 themes.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'm hoping to now, I'll take you through each of the 5 themes and give you a bit of insight into the top-down approach that we've taken when developing the IPL. If we can just move to the next slide. Thank you. So freight is obviously a major driver of the national economy, and the scale of the task continues to grow. Domestic freight movements are projected to reach around 964 billion tonne kilometres by 2050. So what this highlights is not just the growth, but the increasing pressure on how the system operates. In the IPL narrative, we've taken a strong policy view that we need to do more to make rail freight more competitive with road, recognising the critical role that rail plays in supporting a more efficient and connected national freight network. The priority list points to the importance of improving how rail and road networks work together, particularly through harmonised digital train control signalling, stronger intermodal terminal connections, removing level crossings, and more consistent network capability across jurisdictions. So it's about moving more freight more efficiently across longer distances and ensuring the system can support future demand, and looking at our freight systems through a national lens. At the same time, freight is becoming more closely linked to the energy transition, including through the electrification of transport over time. The IPL narrative recognises that freight transport plays a critical role in supporting Australia's net zero targets. We mentioned that cars and light commercial vehicles are the single largest source of transport emissions, comprising around 59% and accounting for more than 10% of total emissions. And rail freight is around 16 times more carbon efficient than road freight, with diesel trains actually using roughly 3 times less fuel. So there's a great opportunity to influence net zero targets through freight. And as David mentioned, ports are central to Australia's trade and economic performance. What we're seeing is increasing pressure from higher volumes combined with constraints in connectivity, particularly around how freight moves in and out of ports, including rail access. Improving how ports connect into the broader network, particularly through stronger rail and intermodal links, will be critical to overall system efficiency. And a big part of how we've developed this understanding, as David mentioned, has been through our direct engagements with jurisdictions and industry, including through those site visits. And that's helped us to really understand or build our understanding of the pinch points, the pressure points that are emerging and that exist at present as well. So moving on to high capacity transport, our cities are growing at a rapid rate. Australia will be 40 million people by the middle of the century. Sydney will be the size of New York and Melbourne will be the size of London by mid-century, which is phenomenal. And that fundamentally changes how you need to move around a city, and also changes the housing and topology on offer for people. So in this chapter of the IPL, we talk a lot about mass transit, and it's really about enabling housing and population growth. It also, out of all of the 5 themes, it has the most proposals by far, which is a signifier of the need and the scale of the task at hand that we're facing, and the need to bring forward proposals to respond to this. So the next chapter of the IPL focuses on water and its role as a critical enabler of growth. It supports housing, communities and economic activity, and needs to be planned alongside other infrastructure systems. The IPL highlights that our water infrastructure is under significant pressure from population growth, climate change and ageing assets, and emerging industries such as data centres, which are large consumers of water and energy, which are a growing risk, but also an opportunity for the country. And what is very clear is that we'll need more water sources in the future to meet the country's needs, and particularly climate-independent water sources, so things like desalination and purified recycled water. And this is an area where long-term planning is particularly important to ensure that long-term water security across the country is met. And finally, the last chapter of the IPL highlights that Australia's energy system is undergoing significant transformation. Renewables are expected to supply around 98% of electricity in the national electricity market by 2050. But it recognises that there is no decarbonisation of transport without decarbonising the grid as well. This requires major investments in generation, in transmission, in storage, firming and supporting infrastructure. The task ahead is enormous and it's growing, but the opportunity it affords the country and decarbonising other sectors is enormous. So as you can see, the IPL is not just a list, it's a clear strategic narrative of what of where we're going as a country and what we need to do to support that. So we think about the IPL as a portfolio with proposals distributed across these 5 themes. It's intentionally organised around these 5 themes and not organised around states and territories, as we focused on systems and networks that drive national change, national being the key organising factor here. Proposals on the IPL, so they may not be physically or even geographically connected, but there is a commonality in that their objectives at a national level. And they've been selected for the IPL as they all align to deliver on common outcomes. Many proposals on the IPL are cross-jurisdictional. There's around 7 of them in total, raising the importance of Australian government involvement. So this slide shows the shape of the infrastructure pipeline by theme. And as you can see, it highlights the concentration of proposals in the high capacity transport and high productivity freight network themes. And as David mentioned earlier, transport is where the Commonwealth plays, and that's where we can have the largest impact, so they can leverage their investment. So importantly, the IPL is all about sequencing and certainty. So not just for governments, but for industry participants, planning capital deployment, workforce pipelines, and long lead skills and capability over the medium to long term. It's structured as a staged investment pipeline aligned to budget, so the year ahead, the forward estimates, years 2 to 4, and the planning years 5 to 10. It isn't a delivery pipeline, but rather an investment blueprint, as David mentioned, that recognises that we can't do everything at once, that things need to be staged. And this staged framework is how we translate that reality into actionable guidance. So short-term investment readiness, medium-term pipeline development, and long-term opportunity identification. So as you can see, there's a concentration of proposals, 44 of them, which is around 65%, that fall into the 2 to 4 year investment pipeline category. Investment and delivery sequencing will matter the most here, as these are expected to move into investment-ready proposals in the next 2 to 4 years, if they do remain priorities. So we'll continue to work with governments and industry to build out our view of longer-term proposals in the 5 to 10 year pipeline and when investment is likely to be needed. So moving on to the next slide. So there are 4 key things that influence proposal sequencing in the IPL investment pipeline. So the first relates to evidence requirements, including IA evaluation stage and the recency of the evaluation. For those that are seeking investment in the upcoming budget, so the investment-ready proposals, we have higher evidence requirements, and those evidence requirements might differ depending on whether they're seeking planning or delivery investment. Existing Australian government investment timing as well is something that we consider. So we'll recognise existing investments that have been made by the Australian government, if it's for planning or delivery or business case funding as well. And we'll think about when that existing investment is going to be expended. We also give consideration to proposal dependencies, so the timing of other related proposals, when they're going to be delivered and when is critical for a related proposal to come online to support and enable those other projects. And of course, we think about the infrastructure need and demand, so whether constraints are existing or emerging and the timing of those as well. Okay, so as you've probably gathered by now, the IPL is an investment pipeline, and inclusion and timing are driven by things like readiness, dependencies, capacity, and demand. So this slide shows an illustrative matrix of our 2026 IPL themes and investment timing categories, and I'll just walk you through a few examples now, showing you the key considerations for these proposals and how we've gone about thinking, categorising them for each of the investment timing categories. So the first there is the Western Sydney Freight Line and Intermodal Terminal in New South Wales. So this proposal relates to constructing a dedicated freight line between the Southern Sydney Freight Line, a new intermodal terminal at the Mamre Road precinct, and the Main West Line near St Mary's, supporting future freight growth and productivity. This proposal has an existing $30 million Australian government commitment to develop a business case for stage 1, which is expected to be expended in 2028-29. So on this basis, we've selected this proposal for the 2 to 4 year pipeline, given the next investment decision is in a couple of years' time. Then there's the West Port Enabling Infrastructure, Anchors Hill Road upgrades in WA. So this is the first proposal to come forward for delivery investment as part of the broader Westport program. It's identified as a critical enabler of future Westport program works. So IA evaluated a final business case for this proposal, and because this is sitting in the investment ready category, that evaluation of the final business case was critical. It was an essential consideration that we needed. And this enabled us to support inclusion of this proposal in that investment ready category for delivery investment. Next, there's the Port of Brisbane Freight Rail Improvements proposal in Queensland. So this proposal involves upgrades to increase freight capacity and efficiency between the Port of Brisbane and the wider rail network, supporting connectivity with future inland rail trains. The proposal is supported by an existing $20 million AG Australian government commitment for planning and business case development. The scope of works is dependent on future delivery of inland rail in Queensland. This is a great example of a dependency that we've considered. And given this dependency, we have listed this proposal in the 5 to 10 year pipeline category so we can see how future inland rail trains are planned and delivered. The next proposal is the Melbourne Suburban Rail Loop Future Stages proposal in Victoria. So investment and delivery focus at present is currently on the Suburban Rail Loop East component of the program, which is progressing to delivery. So this proposal, the future stages, relates to the future stages of the Suburban Rail Loop mass transit system, which includes Suburban Rail Loop North and West, and will support housing and jobs growth in Melbourne's inner and outer suburbs. So on this basis, we see SRL future stages as a priority, but for future investment consideration in the 5 to 10 year pipeline, as it's not needed yet. There are other things to focus on. Next, there's the Launceston Sewerage Improvement Program in Tasmania. So this proposal involves the consolidation of sewage treatment plants, creating capacity for projected housing growth in Launceston, and ensuring the sewage system is compliant with environmental standards. The proposal was included on the IPL as investment ready for planning. It was supported by a recent stage 1 evaluation, so problem identification, recognising that the treatment capacity in the Launceston area is expected to be met within the next 5 years, so planning is needed now. So moving on, lastly, there's the Whyalla Industrial Precinct Enabling Infrastructure proposal in South Australia. So this is a priority proposal relating to sovereign manufacturing, clean energy transition, and regional economic resilience. It proposes to upgrade energy, water, and port infrastructure at Whyalla to enable the transformation of the steelworks into a low emissions industrial precinct, helping to produce low emissions iron and steel. An investment is not needed immediately. Planning is underway, so we've put that one in the 2 to 4 year pipeline. I hope that was helpful. I'll pass back to David now to wrap up.
All right, thanks, Carly. So get your questions ready. I'll just finalise by saying that as we've covered, the priority list is one of several inputs the Australian government will consider in making its investment decisions. But there are 3 clear messages that we're making through the delivery of this product. The first is that infrastructure challenges are increasingly national in nature. There is no shortage of influences and factors that are changing the decisions that we make for infrastructure in the short, medium, long term. So related to that is, and secondly, is around coordination. And for us, that's not just within jurisdictions, but it's across jurisdictions and across sectors. Will be increasingly important to realise those broader outcomes at a national level. And then third, as Carly just explained, the sequencing of projects, thinking about it not just in terms of demand and need, but also around dependencies, market capacity, and how we can plan for infrastructure over time to really realise the productivity, resilience, and livability benefits that we're trying to achieve. So this has been a major refresh of the priority list to the way we've done it in the past. It is much more than just a list. There is a broad strategic narrative. it really will open up the conversation for us with states and territories to think about strategic infrastructure planning and improving coordination going forward. And as I said, in a constrained market, success will depend on recognizing that we can't build everything everywhere and all at once. And we must have discipline to prioritize investment in the projects that will materially advance our nation and communities.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Today's discussion highlights the importance of clear strategic priorities and robust evaluation in guiding infrastructure investment. It also reinforces the critical role that project professionals play in delivering the infrastructure that supports Australia's productivity, reliability, and sustainability. I would like to say that on behalf of the Australian Institute of Project Management, I would like to thank David and the team at Infrastructure Australia for sharing their insights with our community, and we appreciate your participation and look forward to welcoming you to future AIPM events. Again, thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, David. Is there anything you want to say at the end? Floor is yours.
Look, I think you probably tell Coralie and I are really passionate about this work. We're really proud of what we've achieved. It is a great platform for further conversation. Please go on our website, engage with the list, engage with the strategic narrative that on which it's built. We welcome engagement and conversation going forward. So thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you all today.
Thank you, David.